Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the second episode of Pulling the Thread, a forensic science podcast. This is the podcast that investigates investigating, and I am your host, Cristian Chavez, and I will be your guide on this thrilling journey into the fascinating world of forensic science. I am thrilled to have you here, so thank you for listening. For today, my plan is to entertain you with a key topic in the world of forensic science. Today's focus will be on the third learning module, where we learn about some different methods of handling evidence in the forensic science process. So whether you're a fellow enthusiast or a student aspiring to join the ranks of forensic scientists, or simply someone who loves a good mystery, today's podcast is for you. So go ahead and sit back, relax, and get ready to set off on this thrilling journey through collecting data. So please, join me and sit back, relax, and get ready to set off on this thrilling journey through collecting data aspect of forensic science. Join me in uncovering the truth on today's episode of Pulling the Thread. The first topic I would like to touch on is evidence collection and preservation. So let us begin by talking about Locard's exchange principle. First off, Dr. Edmond Locard was a pioneer in forensic science. He proposed this fundamental concept. In this concept, he states that every contact leaves a trace. So in other words, whenever someone interacts with an environment, another person, or any object, they both leave behind and take with them some physical evidence. This principle acts as the backbone of evidence collection and helps forensic scientists solve crimes. With that being said, we have two main types of evidence. So let's dive in and explore the different types of evidence and the manner of which they are collected. For our first type of evidence, we will discuss trace evidence. This category of evidence includes bits of matter or material that can easily be transferred between people, objects, or locations. Some examples of trace evidence can include, but are not limited to, paint, hair, fibers, and dirt. To collect trace evidence, there are several methods that forensic scientists have at their disposal. These meticulous techniques and processes include things like microscopy, tape lifting, and vacuuming. Microscopy, however, is probably the most broad of the three and is used in all three aspects. Microscopy involves investigators using microscopes to examine and compare trace evidence such as hair and fibers. For our next process, we'll discuss tape lifting, which is the process of which a special tape is used to collect trace particles from specific surfaces that are later examined, also under a microscope. For our third process, we've included vacuuming. Vacuum sweepings on crime scenes contain valuable trace evidence that investigators determine to be crucial to solving the case. Preserving trace evidence requires proper packaging, as cross-contamination must be avoided at all costs. Each and every item is placed in a separate container to maintain its integrity. The second type of evidence that I would like to discuss today is impression evidence. Impression evidence is slightly different from that of trace evidence. That's because impression evidence is that of patterns or marks left behind at a crime scene. These patterns can include things like footprints, tire tracks, tool marks, and even in some cases, bite marks. The collection of impression evidence is a little more complex than that of trace evidence. Typically, when conducting investigations into trace evidence, it is harder to transport and collect these parts of evidence. As a result, the method in which we collect our information is quite varied, so we'll discuss some of those methods. The first of these methods that I would like to discuss is photography. Comprehensive photographs are taken from multiple angles to document impressions left behind at crime scenes. These photographs are stitched together to create a complete and comprehensive view of the crime scene and any impression evidence that may have been left behind. The second method I would like to discuss is casting. Casting is when impressions in soft materials like mud or snow are casted or fit with a mold. Some of these molds could include things like dental stone and can even be created with other casting materials such as foam or other types of hardening materials. Just like trace evidence, some impression evidence can be collected by the method of lifting. By dusting or using chemical methods, we can lift chemical impressions from. Like trace evidence, some impression evidence can be collected by method of lifting. By dusting or sometimes even using certain chemicals, we can lift impressions from hard surfaces. The preservation of all the evidence that we collect is crucial, as it can easily be altered or damaged. Any types of cast or lifted prints that we collect are carefully packaged to prevent any kind of distortion. The collection and preservation of evidence is a very meticulous and critical process in forensic science. It gives us as investigators the opportunity to reconstruct the evidence and events that surround a crime. It also helps us identify any potential suspects and present compelling evidence in court. One of the key takeaways I'd like you to take from this information I've provided is that the collection and preservation of evidence is a meticulous and critical process in forensic science. It gives us, as investigators, the opportunity to reconstruct the events surrounding a crime. It also allows us to identify potential suspects and present compelling evidence in court. One of the key takeaways is that it's all about attention to details. If we can understand Locard's principle and ensure the integrity of the evidence collected, we are sure to build a strong case. Attention to detail is the core of the collection of information from eyewitnesses, which makes this the best point to transition to our next topic that we're going to discuss. Eyewitnesses are often the first line of defense or offense in court, depending on which side you're on, and they usually are investigators' most direct sources of information following a crime. Their accounts can make or break a case, but they are not without their challenges. One of the most significant shortcomings of relying on a single eyewitness is the potential for inaccuracies. This ties back to the attention to detail. Memory is very malleable and easily influenced by various factors. These include stress, trauma, and the passing of time. When eyewitnesses are questioned by investigators, they might unknowingly introduce errors into their recollections. This phenomenon can be called memory contamination. There are a number of issues that can compromise the reliability of eyewitness testimony. Some of these issues include stress and trauma, leading questions, and memory decay. When we're talking about stress and trauma, it's very common that witnesses to a crime experience high levels of stress and fear when they're witnessing this event. This often impairs their ability to accurately recall details. The brain's response to trauma can usually lead to tunnel vision, where individuals usually focus on certain random aspects of the event while they ignore others. When we're talking about leading question, we're talking about the problem that can be avoided by a skilled and ethical forensic scientist. The way or manner that questions are asked during interviews can significantly have an impact on a witness's testimony. Even well-intentioned investigators can inadvertently bias a witness by asking them suggestive questions. Next, when we're talking about memory decay, I'm sure it's something that you've all experienced at some point, in one way or another. Over time, our memories naturally fade and become less reliable. Even a well-intentioned and extremely attentive eyewitness may forget key details that they noticed as time passes. Given these challenges, when we only have one eyewitness to a crime, it is very clear that relying solely on a single witness can be risky. This is where the importance of having multiple eyewitnesses comes into play. Multiple eyewitnesses bring with them many benefits when we're solving a crime. For one, they provide us a sense of cross-verification. When several witnesses independently corroborate key details of a crime or an event, it really improves the credibility of their recollections. Consistency among multiple eyewitnesses is a strong indicator of accuracy. Another benefit of having multiple eyewitnesses is the ability to distinguish between reliable and unreliable witnesses. When we compare multiple eyewitness accounts, us as investigators are able to identify any differences and any inaccuracies that they may be describing. As we saw and discussed in class when we participated in the sketching an eyewitnesses recollection activity, we experienced a case where having more witnesses was both beneficial and harmful. Because we had two witnesses, we were able to confirm and be more sure about the details that they both provided that matched. However, when their testimonies disagreed with each other, it muddied the waters even more and we weren't sure who to believe. To solve this issue, 3 or more witnesses is ideal. With 3 or more witnesses, it carries all of the benefits of having multiple witnesses with none of the shortcomings, like we saw with 2. Eyewitnesses play a pivotal role in crime investigations, but their accounts are not always the most accurate. This is why the best investigations involve a network of information both from evidence collection and eyewitness testimonies. The use of multiple sources of information when putting together an investigation is extremely important, and it is also very good practice. The best forensic scientists use skills in all aspects of the field to come to their conclusions. But for the time being, we'll only focus on these 2 important aspects in our next segment, where we will talk about Ted Bundy and his crimes. Ted Bundy was one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. He terrorized the country during the 70s as a charismatic and intelligent man. He used his charm to gain the trust of his victims and lure them in. His case is a great example of how eyewitnesses and evidence collection played crucial roles in his capture and conviction. Ted Bundy's crimes spanned multiple states, and his capture involved a crucial combination of eyewitness accounts and forensic evidence. To begin, let's discuss the role of eyewitness accounts in this case. In the early 70s, women began to disappear in the areas where Bundy had frequently been. The eyewitnesses in these cases were often the survivors of his attacks, and they provided valuable accounts of their terrifying encounters. One of the most significant eyewitnesses in Ted Bundy's case was Carol DaRonch. She narrowly escaped Bundy's clutches and provided a detailed description of his appearance and, most importantly, his car, which later became a key piece of information that helped the investigation. Secondly, the collection and examination of evidence was crucial to catching Bundy. Forensic evidence played a significant role in linking Bundy to his crimes. The case relied on physical evidence that both connected him to the scenes of the crimes and also identified him as the perpetrator. The beginning of the end for Bundy came when investigators discovered a crucial piece of evidence in his car. They found fibers that matched those found on several of the victims, and the beginning of the end for Bundy came when investigators discovered a crucial piece of evidence in his car. They discovered fibers that matched those found on several of the victims. Forensic experts collected and meticulously examined these fibers and connected them to the abductions and murders. This strengthened the case against him. In the search of Bundy's vehicle, it was revealed that there was substantial evidence including burglary tools, restraints, and women's or the victim's clothing. This was instrumental in connecting him to the disappearances and the murders. When in court, both the physical evidence and eyewitness accounts were critical to the trial. Both of these aspects helped make the case against Bundy for his crimes. For our next segment, I will discuss some current events that are relevant to the aspects that we've been discussing. We will discuss how physical evidence and eyewitness accounts have played a role. Earlier today in West Texas, a man entered a standoff with police at a gas station. There were several people inside the gas station before the standoff had began. As I'm sure the investigation is ongoing, more information will come out, and most of it will likely come from the eyewitness's recollection of the event. In this case, another aspect that will help along the investigation is likely the presence of CCTV cameras. Most gas stations have surveillance cameras for instances such as this. The last part of this evidence package, if you will, is the physical evidence that was likely collected by the police during the actual standoff. This might include the weapons that were involved, along with any other substances or artifacts that were on the person of the suspect. As always, I want you, the listeners, to be an active participant in this learning experience. So in addition to listening, please interact by posting any questions, comments, or any ideas you might have for the podcast in the comments below. That's all I have for this week. Thank you for listening to Pulling the Thread. Ciao.